Welcome back to Kings of the North. Lesmerises and Bill Landis here on a Thursday Picks and Previews. Landis, great slate of Northern games and a couple nice cram-it games at the end, right? Like bangers.
Yeah, this is we don't have a big game breakdown, but going through it, I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is interesting. This is interesting.
Yeah.
And then we got some good, nice crammage cherry on the top.
Yeah. So again, a lot of other national shows that you're going to find. Might be doing a lot on Ole Miss, Georgia, and Alabama, LSU, and we're doing a tiny bit at the end. But we have 9 games this week, Landis, where 2 of our 28 Northern teams are going head-to-head. And obviously, we have 16 of the 18 Big Ten teams that we claim as ours. We have 8 of the 16 Big 12 teams, and we have 3 of the 17 ACC teams. So we have 5 Big Ten games that are North versus North, which is not a surprise. But we have 3 Big 12 games that are North versus North, which is awesome. And we have an ACC game. So the head-to-head North versus North, Minnesota-Rutgers, Purdue, Ohio State, Michigan, Indiana, Maryland, Oregon, Washington, Penn State, BYU-Utah in the Holy War, and I got a BYU pennant.
Oh, I didn't even notice that. How about that?
It's behind my head. A lot of people want me to move my head a certain way. It's like, I don't know, the camera. But they still don't have the exact same banner. I got banners for all our teams except BYU because they just, whatever reason, there's not a BYU banner exactly like it. And we have a wonderful viewer and listener who's been trying to tell me he's made a BYU banner for me or found one. I will get back to you. But in the meantime, I was like, what? I have to have, if you're listening to the podcast, I'm moving my head so people can see it. I have to have BYU representation. So I don't have it Velcroed in, but it's resting on the crown, which
that's nice.
Given the BYU's undefeated, I think is appropriate.
Yeah, I like it.
So BYU-Utah, which again, I had plans to go to, but it's just too late at night, so I'm not going. Iowa State, Kansas, West Virginia-Cincinnati, which I have a lot of thoughts about. And then we have Boston College, Syracuse. So those are our 9 Northern games. We only have 4 games where it's North versus non-North. Iowa, UCLA, Colorado, Texas Tech, Florida State, Notre Dame, and Virginia Pitt. And then we have 6 teams that are off this week. Kansas State, Michigan State, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Northwestern. So anyway, that's why we're fired up, because we're conflicted. Sometimes, for instance, let's run through our horrible picks last week. When I went 8-7 and you went 9-6, you beat me again. Second straight week, you beat me head to head. But there were multiple games, obviously, when I go 8-7 and you go 9-6. There's a bunch of games we both lost. There were, of the 15 games we picked last week, there were 6 upsets. Syracuse was an underdog in one that we had. Washington beat USC as an underdog that we had. But we did not have Texas Tech beating Iowa State. We did not have UCLA beating Nebraska. We did not have Houston beating Kansas State. And we did not have Louisville beating Clemson in a cram-it game. I picked the wrong ACC upset. We had 2 ACC games. I picked Duke to beat Miami, the favorite one there, but then we had the upset in Louisville, Clemson. So that's 6 upsets out of 15, Landis. Mm-hmm. We have to be on alert for these at this time of the year. But when it's North versus North, it's like, well, okay, I really got to try to use my head here, because you can't just go by long live the North.
Being a little too chalky, I think, with my picks did influence me to pick an upset this week of some importance.
Okay. I feel like I hit on a couple decent upsets early in the year, and I just have not been able... I have not found them, the ones to pick. One of them that we did pick last week, we both picked Pitt to win as a touchdown underdog at SMU. Was that just heart?
Yeah, that was. I think I might have said when I made the pick, I was I don't have much belief in this, but how can I pick against Pitt?
Yeah. So then SMU just completely took care of business, 48-25 in that one. It wasn't even that close. So anyway, all right. So those are the standings for the year. I'm 167-43. You are 158 and 52. So we're I'm still a little bit ahead. It's all good though.
And a reminder, these are not against the spread.
These are not against the spread. And I can't tell
just
if that's good or I can't tell if that's good or not.
It's definitely not good.
It's not for real.
I mean, I don't. If we're just picking winners, I feel like we should be a little better than that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's pick some winners this week. And let's start with a game that is not North versus North, but it's super interesting, super important. And it's about whether Colorado can stay right in the thick of the Big 12 race, Landis. We've covered a lot of that this week. The playoff races, we've talked a lot of Big 12. BYU's undefeated. Colorado and Iowa State each have one conference loss. They are the three teams most likely to make it at this point to the Big 12 title game. There's a bunch of other teams with two conference losses, including West Virginia and Cincinnati, who play each other this week. Texas Tech just got juicy and won on the road at Iowa State to throw this race into a little turmoil. And now Texas Tech is going home to host Colorado, 4 p.m. Saturday. Colorado is a 3.5-point road favorite, Landis. Are you intrigued by this one?
I'm very intrigued by it. Yeah, this is Big Noon. So Big Noon is going to be at 4:00 this weekend. The Fox show will be there. I believe Justin Goal, I was going to call him. Gus and Joel are going to call this game for Fox.
Joel is going to be out of his freaking Buffalo mind for this one.
Yeah. Which, like, you know, I think he's allowed to be, right? I think he's allowed.
He's a Colorado quarterback. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's been a lot about like where are the haters now kind of stuff with Colorado.
Yeah, and Gus is going to be right there with him because he's a good teammate. So there's going to be a lot of Colorado flavor, I think, on this broadcast. Interesting connection here that Joey McGuire, the Texas Tech head coach, coached Deion Sanders Jr. in high school. And then Deion and Joey McGuire coached against each other as Texas high school football coaches. So they know each other going back a decent ways. Deion said he's got a lot of respect for Joe McGuire. I don't know. I feel the same about this game as I felt about Iowa State going into last week, which is that Texas Tech's defense is not very good. And I thought Iowa State was kind of going to throw all over them and win that game. And obviously that didn't happen. But I feel similarly about this one. Texas Tech is 133rd in pass defense. I think it did move up a spot from last week. It's 113th in passing efficiency defense. It's 114th in EPA per dropback. It has allowed 18 pass plays of 30 yards or more, and only 8 teams in the country have allowed more than that. And like here comes Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter and all one of the more explosive passing attacks in the country. I have a hard time seeing Texas Tech covering Colorado in this game, right? But on the flip side of that too, it's a test for Colorado's defense because Baron Morton, as we saw last week, is a very good quarterback for Texas Tech. Taj Brooks is one of the best running backs in the country. So I think this is an offense-leaning game, even though Colorado, interestingly enough, like its profile this year is a little different in that it is ranked higher currently in defensive efficiency than it is offensive efficiency. On the Brian Fremeau, right? Is that say that right? Fremeau,
you did. You watched the show. You watched the show.
I did. Yeah. So last year Colorado was 96 in defensive efficiency. This year it's 38th, and its offense is 42nd. So it is, like, as we've discussed like at multiple points throughout the season, this has become a fairly competent defense for Colorado, and they get to pair it with an offense that obviously has a lot of weapons still. So I'm thinking lots of points here. One other thing before I let you share what you think on this game: Texas Tech has 6 starters listed as questionable for this game, including 5 on defense. So I would assume some of those guys are going to play, but if they do, they'll be playing injured. So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind.
Look at you getting hot on the score. So this is a game that every playoff contender and every Big 12 contender, like, I think, is going to watch with a lot of interest because we've talked about Iowa State as being like a fundamental kind of win on the margins teams that does a lot of things right, but then also they can be incredibly explosive. And Colorado is like approaching that. And when they were Shedeur Sanders as a future NFL quarterback and Travis Hunter as a player unlike we've seen in years in college football, but gigantic holes on the offensive line, real questions about the defense, it was like they were more of a novelty. It's like, well, those guys are good, but what else? And as the offensive line has played better, as this defensive unit, but like the defensive secondary with Robert Livingston as defensive coordinator, they've played better. All of a sudden, now Colorado is, they're a pretty good football team. And by the way, they have, I think, the best quarterback in college football and the best playmaker in college football. I'm sure we could have a discussion of what does playmaker mean to you.
Right.
But when you add the fundamentals of Colorado and just what you're talking about a little bit of like, hey, they're actually more efficient on defense than you would expect. That gets scary. And that gets into like, get these guys. This gets scary for if someone plays them in the Big 12 title game. This gets scary for if they get in the playoff, what would this look like? I'm not saying Colorado is a national title contender, but lock down the fundamentals. And I don't want to play Shedeur Sanders. I don't want to play Shedeur Sanders anyway. But if he's getting protection, right?
Yeah, and he's getting better protection. I think maybe the area where Colorado's made the most progress is perhaps on the defensive line. Just like some of those guys they brought in the portal have really hit, which has made the defense better. Because I don't know how scared I am of Colorado's secondary outside of Travis Hunter. Okay. And I actually think, just with my own eyes watching, there's a point to be made that maybe the secondary looked a little better when Shiloh Sanders wasn't playing. But it's still a good defense. It's vastly improved. And the offensive line, no doubt about it, is better. They still don't run the ball great.
No. But there's a lot of one-handed teams, as we've said. Like, okay, it's hard to be good at all four phases.
And they run it a little better, right? They had me fooled for a couple of weeks. There was like, oh, is this actually a functional rushing attack? And maybe it's not quite that, but it is something to pair with the high-flying passing attack. So, yeah, I think I don't disagree with the general idea that, like, this is a far more complete football team than it was last year, and probably more complete than anyone expected it to be this year, even if they thought it was going to be better.
So you have 42-41. Like, dude, if your score hits, which is, by the way, the score that, right? Both of us picked for the Ohio State Georgia semifinal that actually hit. Is that correct? 42-41.
Yeah.
Georgia beat Ohio State. The most famous thing. We've had two moments in our lives as friends and co-hosts. One was when working for separate entities, unaware of each other's predictions, we picked the same score for the Georgia-Ohio State semifinal and nailed it. And the other was when we said that Just Like Heaven's our favorite song. So like 42-41, if Colorado wins this game, this is the story of the weekend, isn't it? Because this is Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter probably having to have awesome games for Colorado to do this, and then this being packed with highlights.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm envisioning. But I guess I would say to that, though, I have picked this style of game for Colorado before, and it has not really gotten to that point, which is a credit to Colorado, right? Because Colorado played them bonkers games all the time last year. And I don't know that it's played in a lot of them because it's just like better than the other teams.
The Baylor game was bonkers. They hit a Hail Mary.
They have definitely had some, but like I think I might have picked a similar score for the UCF game, and it wasn't that at all, right? So
yeah,
I won't be surprised if we're just watching this game. It's like, nope, Colorado's better. Colorado won by 3 scores.
Yeah.
I like I said, I don't think Texas Tech can cover Colorado, and while I like Colorado's improved defense, I am envisioning Texas Tech being able to kind of go shot for shot with the Buffaloes.
Which that was, I mean, Colorado's coming off a bye, Texas Tech coming off a huge win, but like that was the Cincinnati-Colorado game. I thought was like Cincinnati and Colorado, I think are pretty good teams and pretty similar. I just don't know if Cincinnati can cover those guys. And so like that, but again, that's the whole thing. You start getting in, that's sort of what I was saying. Like you get into a matchup of like, you know what, these are two pretty good football teams. I just don't know how they're going to cover Colorado. And then like that is quite an edge because I mean, honestly, that's what happens with Ohio State sometimes. Like Ohio State, Penn State, what is it? Now, it's not really how it turned out, but there's been a lot of games, right? Where sometimes Ohio State's a good team, they're playing a good team, and then it's like, well, how are you going to cover the Ohio State passing game?
Yeah.
And
I mean, it almost turned into that, like two missed deep throws, and maybe we're having that conversation.
But
off that game, right?
You know, that's quite in an otherwise even game, that's quite an edge to have. Oh, they can't cover us. Okay. That's a problem. So I have 31-22, not nearly as high scoring as yours, but I'd take your score. That's going to be a fun game to watch.
Yeah, that's my lucky score. I'm going to roll with it.
Yeah. 4 Eastern on Saturday. All right. Second game, we're going to do Washington at Penn State. This is a prime time game Saturday night. Penn State's a 2-touchdown favorite at home. Whiteout game. Penn State coming off a record crowd against Ohio State, 111,030. Pretty cool. 9-6 in whiteout games, but they've won their last 4. I think they just stopped playing like Ohio State in all their whiteout games, so now they can win some of them. They thumped Iowa in their whiteout game last year, 31-0. These teams have not met. Welcome to the new world. These teams have not met in the regular season since 1921. Played bowl games in 83 and 2017. Would it be weird for me to say that these teams are kind of the same team and one is a playoff contender and one's trying to make a bowl? But when you look at the numbers, they're not that different.
It's not weird to say, but I think they're, especially the defensive side for Washington, there's some context that is necessary with how good statistically that defense has been.
So offensive success rate, doing your job play to play, Penn State 8, Washington 13. Defensive success rate, Penn State is significantly better. Number 8 versus number 43. Same turnover margin, same number of explosive plays per game. They're both kind of bad at field position, right? As we've been searching for why isn't Washington better, field position, I think, is something you've brought up in the past, and that's true. But like in this matchup, Penn State's no better at it. So I don't know. 2 touchdown spread. I'm a little bit on alert for Washington to come out and maybe give them a game here, but I still have no handle on Washington. Deny Dennis Sutton, who only played 5 snaps against Ohio State. James Franklin this week, their opposite rush end from Abdul Carter. Seems like he should play more, which could potentially be a pretty big deal. He's had some games, or he had games of 4, 5, and 6 pressures earlier this year against Big Ten quality play. Like, he's really mattered at times. Last week against Ohio State, Abdul Carter had 6 pressures and the rest of the team had 5 combined. Like, the 2 edge guys who played instead of Sutton only had 2. So to have him back would be a big deal. And also because Washington is shuffling their offensive line. They're on their 3rd left tackle. Callie Tufai is a second-year guy who started at left tackle for the first time last week. He was like a backup last year. I think they believe like he's growing into this, but they played 2 other guys earlier this year, and they switched up some guys at right guard last week, the last couple of weeks. Like, they've just been moving some guys around, but they didn't give up on any sacks last week, like with kind of a new look offensive line. And Jed Fish was really excited about that. He thought they only kind of screwed up like 4 plays. Was his initial reaction of like they had 73 offensive snaps and only 4 went screwy. So on one hand, I think you can look at the Washington shuffles on the offensive line and maybe have questions about it. And what's Abdul Carter going to do? But maybe the shuffling is figuring some stuff out. So I'm wondering if especially if Sutton's back, if that could be the deciding factor for this game. Again, like a shuffled offensive line for Washington, and Penn State gets healthy on the defensive line and just gets after it. But also, this might be pretty tight.
Can I hit you with a stat?
No.
That's nothing.
This is my breakdown. I don't want to hear it. I'm just
kidding. A trend. It's a trend.
You got it. Hit me.
So Penn State beat Ohio State in 2016. In the 7 games since then, following a loss to Ohio State, James Franklin is 2-5 against the spread with 3 outright losses. Last year, after losing to Ohio State, Penn State was a 31-point favorite against Indiana, and that game was tied with 3 minutes left before Penn State won 33-24.
That's just Curt Cignetti being Curt Cignetti. I mean, Curt Cignetti, oh, that's right. He wasn't the coach last year.
He was not there. Yeah. Decidedly not a Curt Cignetti Indiana team. I think Ohio State tends to linger on the brain of Penn State. And I don't know so much in a way that I would worry about Penn State losing here, because there's just a lot of the underlying issues with Washington that have kept it from being competitive in games like this, especially on the road. And it's a whiteout and all those things, but I am imagining it being closer just because Penn State has not been great at rebounding from the Ohio State games. Washington has had a really good pass defense this year. And as I said, it comes with necessary context, right? The only team it has played inside the top 50 in passing efficiency is Indiana, and Curtis Rourke didn't play that game. That was the game that he missed. So you could make the argument, at least from an efficiency standpoint, that this is the best passing attack that Washington has seen this year. But also, like, does anything about Penn State's passing attack really scare you right now? Like, they are like, I think, fully back to the drawing board on receiver to try to figure out how they can get more explosivity out of that position, to the point where James Franklin said this week that Tyseer Denmark, who's a true freshman from Philadelphia, might play some more. I think he's appeared in 1 game this year. They might throw him out there in an effort to just try to spark something with the passing game, which has really just been Drew Aller throwing the ball to running backs and tight ends. I think Nick Singleton was their leading receiver, right?
He was getting asked about like what happened to Amari Evans, right? Who had the big play against West Virginia, and James Franklin was sort of saying, well, There's some times that we've called a deep shot and it wasn't open. There's times we've called a deep shot and we got pressure. There's times we called a deep shot, maybe we just didn't take it. But like, again, the number one thing in the preseason for James Franklin was we hired an offensive coordinator to help create explosive plays. And now here we are in November asking about why Penn State doesn't have more explosive plays.
Yeah. And I to the point of the whiteout, like what kind of whiteout crowd will this be? Like, it's after a loss. It's on. Not that I guess it matters. Like, it's on Peacock, right? It's not even on linear television.
Is this a test for the Penn State fan base? Because typically, often in the past, if you lose to Ohio State, all right, that's kind of it. Mm-hmm. We're back. We are who we are. But now you lost to Ohio State, but you're right in the playoff race. Handle your business. You're going to be in the first 12-team playoff. So the team hasn't changed maybe as much as we expected or as much as Penn State wanted it to change, but the context has changed. Does that mean Penn State fans should show up fired up for a whiteout to put something on Washington because they're trying to be the 6 seed instead of the 9 seed? Like that, it might require an adjustment in thinking that you show up after. And same thing for the team. Like, your stats are meaningful, but that's not the world anymore. You don't have to be downtrodden after you lose a game. There's still great opportunity there. Does that affect the mindset of the program and the fan base? This is a great test for it.
It is. And there would also be, I think, something cathartic for the fan base too, to like show up and make it an environment, and then you act like put it on Washington, like go out and handle your business, win by a couple scores, kind of, which I think with Penn State's talent and the way that Washington has played at times this year is definitely possible. I'm leaning a little more toward a lingering, a little bit like an emotional letdown that has this game closer. Okay. And maybe my touchdown game is Washington scoring late to make it that, but I have 31-24 Penn State.
I have 38-20. Your initial stat, I was like, well, I went too high on this, but now maybe I talked myself into like new context, new bounce back. To your point about the freshman receiver, you've heard some different coaches just going through stuff this week. We've reached the point where you might see some young guys start to play because they haven't played yet or have only played one game, and they now feel like, okay, we have 2 or 3 games to play with and not burn a red shirt. Mm-hmm. So that's still a consideration. I just don't thinking of, especially with skill guys, if you really want to think about red shirts with offensive linemen and maybe quarterbacks, we've been talking this year about how Kyle McCord like burned a red shirt at Ohio State that he really could use now and Syracuse could use with him. But I don't know, like how many fifth-year receivers who matter really stick around. But anyway, coaches still think that way. And to your point, there's going to be some guys popping up who might help good teams that they've just been easing in because they're young and they weren't ready, but also strategically, and now they can let it rip a little bit. Yeah.
The other part of that too is like if you time it right, they can play, and then the postseason doesn't count against their eligibility. Right.
So it's 4 in the regular season, and then the postseason's free. Yeah. So Denzel Boston, by the way, our guy for Washington, kind of got back at it last week. He had 2 straight games of fewer than 50 yards receiving. Last week, 9 for 99, 13 targets, a season high. So again, there's some stuff here. I'm curious about Penn State's defensive line against Washington's reshuffled offensive line, but like, give me Denzel Boston against this Penn State secondary. I mean, I'm looking forward to that matchup.
Yeah, so, I think that'll be a fun one. Yeah.
All right. Next one. What is the next one? The next one, is Michigan, Indiana. You're going, Landis. Tell everybody.
I am going. I thought until 24 hours ago that this game was at noon. So I'm glad that you told me it wasn't. It's at 3:30 on CBS.
Look at the information this show provides, sometimes even to the people on it.
That's right.
Like that. Yeah. Don't think that I have not learned things from our own show that I did not know before the words were coming out of your mouth or my mouth. This is a 3:30 Eastern time game on Saturday. Indiana is about a 2-touchdown favorite at home against the defending national champs, which again, we know that, but it just can still blow your mind. 2-touchdown favorite against the defending national champs.
And I think like people will be expecting Indiana to win this game because of that. And Michigan has not had a good season, but I do think it is worth reminding yourself as you sit down to watch this game at 3:30, what kind of moment this is for Indiana. I was just, before we started recording our show here, I was listening to a little bit of the Crimson Cast. Yeah. And they were talking about like how big of a deal this is to have Michigan coming to Bloomington with an opportunity to win. Michigan is 62-10 all time against Indiana. The Hoosiers won in 2020. in the COVID year in Bloomington. But prior to that, its last win was in 1987 against Michigan.
Okay.
So like you don't dismiss entirely beating them in 2020, but obviously this would be a heck of a lot more meaningful, I think, than that game was back then. So like whatever you think of Michigan, this matters greatly to Indiana, to its fans, to its program, to the people who are going to be in that stadium on Saturday in Bloomington. This is a huge deal. And still, like, in a lot of ways, I think a test for Indiana, right? We were talking about this a couple weeks ago. We were talking about the Joe Moore Award and how Indiana's offensive line was not on the midseason honor roll. I think if the timing is the same as last year, the semifinalist for the Joe Moore Award, which is given to the best offensive line in the country, should be announced next week or maybe a couple days after that. And I think Indiana deserves to be on there with what it has done this year. But this would also go a long way, I think, in solidifying that status, because the one thing about Michigan that is still very good is its defensive line. And Indiana is third in PFF's pass blocking efficiency rate. The only two teams that are higher are New Mexico and Oklahoma State, oddly enough. Indiana
Don't mess with New Mexico. Do not mess with New Mexico.
I've always said that. Indiana has not allowed a sack in either of the last two games. It really just like ran the ball down Washington's throat to close that game out. It was like second half. I think they threw the ball one time and they just won it with their offensive line, and they won that game running the ball. This is a very good group. But now we'll face Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Derek Moore, Josiah Stewart. Graham, Moore, and Stewart are all top 30 among Power 4 defenders in total pressures. Stewart and Moore are number 1 and number 2, respectively, in pass rush win rate on true pass sets this year. This is an excellent defensive line. And if we come out of this game thinking, man, that Indiana offensive line is pretty good, then I think they might be the best offensive line in the country.
Okay. Wow, what a test for a guy, Mike Kadick, starting center inside with Grant and Graham there. So here's my question. Big moment, big opportunity. Indiana is lower in the college football playoff rankings than probably it wanted to be. Probably lower than it thought it deserved to be. That's what a lot of people are saying. So with an opportunity like that, my guess is that Curt Cignetti comes out. Could he be more? Can you be more Cignetti than he's been? Hold on a second. I mean, is this a 3-pack game? Like, is it like what is
4, 1 per quarter?
1 per quarter. Can you? I mean, that's the final straw. Not that we are promoting smoking. But if Curt Cignetti just said, like, the heck with it, and I'm smoking heaters on the sideline in the middle of the game, my anticipation is that with this opportunity, they're going to play for 80 minutes in this 60-minute game. They are not going to stop because they are trying to show. And I can see Curt Cignetti's post-game tweet. Like, was that good enough for you, committee? After a 30-point win over Michigan? Like, that is. I think they have the desire to do that. Do they have the ability to do that? I think they probably do. Do you think they can?
Yeah, as long as they can block, as long as they can protect Curtis Rourke, because Will Johnson, again, is probably not going to play for Michigan. Jair Hill, their number 2 corner who didn't play against Oregon, should play. And maybe if he plays, they can move Zeke Berry, who was playing outside against Oregon, back to the nickel spot. But we've had questions about that secondary all season long. I don't know that without Will Johnson that Michigan will be able to cover Indiana's receivers for the entirety of the game, provided that Curtis Rourke has time to get them the ball. But if Curtis Rourke is under duress the entire time, like that's the path to victory for Michigan, is to win up front on defense, generate a lot of havoc, get Indiana out of its game, and then just like run the ball and hope you get 3 touchdowns, and that's enough to win the game if you're Michigan. But like I have a lot of belief in Indiana's offensive line, so I don't know that it's going to go that way, at least not for the entire game. Maybe I have a little bit of a lower scoring game because I do think it will be the most maybe Indiana's offense struggles to move the ball regularly this year. And actually, like, I thought I've picked up from Curt Cignetti this week that he knows this is a different challenge than anything they've seen so far. Like, especially
just from a talent perspective, right? I mean, we know it's,
and especially with
Michigan,
defense. Yeah. I think they just, like, they've really put it on teams this year. Indiana has, and I just think there's a lot of respect for what Michigan has done, what it did last year, what it has back on defense, and a knowledge that maybe it won't be quite as easy to do that this week.
Tishu and I are doing the betting show on Friday morning. I really like Indiana minus 14.5. I'd like them even more at minus 13.5 if that number would move, because like based on this theory, would that, so you're right at that with your pick. Would you advise a bet on Indiana makes a statement, or are you saying that because this is the most talented team that Indiana has faced and still maybe it's one of the best, it still will be in contention for the best defensive line in the country, that like you think a stomping is not in the cards?
I guess it just depends on what's a stomping, because like in my mind, a stomping can be like 28-3, right? That like Michigan does nothing
covers,
on offense.
I mean, I like that, but do you cover 14.5?
Yeah. So. I definitely think they could. It's a little like Michigan's secondary, like Jair Hill, I think in particular, has been like a little hot and cold up and down throughout the year. Games where he's looked really good and games where he just like has struggled to cover anybody.
Yeah.
I can't get the Washington game out of my head whenever I try to think about Michigan trying to stop a potent passing attack. And like certainly last week they didn't do it well against Oregon either, but they were pretty shorthanded in that game. Against Washington, like had their guys, and Washington, like they couldn't cover Washington. So
yeah.
This is a better version of that. Maybe Indiana doesn't have a receiver quite as good as Denzel Boston, but Indiana has 4 receivers that I think are serious dudes and a pretty good quarterback too, right? So I don't think we're looking at like Indiana goes from putting 40 on everybody it plays to all of a sudden it can't muster 2 touchdown territory. But maybe I don't think Indiana's been held under 31 points this year. So I have Michigan doing at least that much with its defense.
All right. So I'm at 38-12. That to me is that's a Cignetti statement. Would you agree?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
38-12. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're at 27-13. All right.
Yeah.
Last game, all these early games, we have 4 games that we're spending a little more time on, and we're spending a little more time on West Virginia-Cincinnati because like I'm just like fascinated by this game. And part of the reason, Landis, is because like we're right in the middle of it. So people know that we are based in Columbus, Ohio. Neil Brown mentioned this at Big 12 Media Days, and it's been like on my mind the entire year. He talked about it again this week. The plan, well, it's not the plan, it's what they're going to do. West Virginia is going to have team meetings Friday morning, get on a bus and drive 4 hours to Cincinnati, but they're going to stop in Columbus, Ohio halfway and practice.
Did he say where?
I want to know. He did not. Someone asked like if they're doing it. He said, I know we're not doing it at Ohio State. And somebody was like, oh, you should scrimmage Ohio State. And he was like, so he said he doesn't know if it's a high school or a local college. So that's what I'm going to be spending my Friday doing, is trying to find West Virginia.
Just driving around the area trying to find West Virginia. Yeah. So
he said they will fly back after the game. But this is such a northern game. Like this is a perfectly northern game. And it makes me mad that it's not a protected rivalry in the Big 12. There are only 4 protected rivalries in the Big 12. The Holy War, BYU-Utah, which we're also seeing this week. Kansas State, of course, which you've got to protect. Arizona State, of course, you've got to protect. And Baylor-TCU, I get it. So those are all in-state. I think they should protect this. And
Armageddon's not protected?
No. Like it's like they got a little loose, and I would like to see a reevaluation, because like what's the goal? So UCF plays West Virginia and Kansas State and Iowa State and Cincinnati a little less frequently if you protect these 2 other rivalries. I think this can be great. I would love for this to be a great rivalry. It's like more. So you think about Morgantown, which has been hanging out here on the edge of the Big 12 for a decade. Now Cincinnati joined Cincinnati in year 2 in the Big 12. It's like a 4.5-hour drive from Morgantown to Cincinnati. The next closest school is 13 hours. Whether you're driving south to UCF or driving further into the Midwest for Iowa State, like they need to seize on this, I think. And so we would like to, when next time we talk to Brett Yormark, like this should be protected and Farmageddon should be protected. Why wouldn't this be protected? The ACC protects our games. The ACC has a 3-way protection for Syracuse, Pitt, and BC. They need to protect this game too.
I agree.
17-3-1, West Virginia leads the series. So like they did play each other when they were in the Big East. They played 10 of 11 years between 2002 and 2011. West Virginia won 7 of 10 there. So that's a lot of. So Neil Brown's into it. He said you can't manufacture it. You've got to make it on the field in terms of West Virginia-Cincinnati being a rivalry. But I think it's a game that should be played every single year. So Neil Brown's on board. We're on board. We're the Kings of the North. I mean, we're not the Kings of the North. We're all the Kings of the North. But as the show, we represent an audience that wants to see West Virginia and Cincinnati play each other. As a note, these teams have lost a combined 7 games. West Virginia's 4-4, Cincinnati's 5-3. 6 of those 7 games are to ranked teams. So you've got to win some games against good teams. That's how you are good. But as a reminder, West Virginia's 4 losses, going by this week's college football playoff rankings, are to number 6 Penn State, 17 Iowa State, 18 Pitt, 19 Kansas State. Cincinnati's losses are to 18 Pitt, 20 Colorado, and a 6-3 Texas Tech team that just beat Iowa State. Mm. So, and Neil Brown's talked about this. They still both have 2 losses in the Big 12.
Yeah.
And Neil Brown said, I wouldn't be surprised if a 2-loss team makes the Big 12 championship game, because all that would require is Colorado and Iowa State losing another conference game before the end of the year. So it's not quite a prediction. But what he's saying, Landis, is that this game matters, because in that scenario, and he said, I don't know what the tiebreakers are, and neither do I, because there's like 5 teams with 2 losses. If you think that, then if Cincinnati or West Virginia wins out, they're at least in a tie, and then we'll see what the tiebreakers are. So, like, I think not only am I excited for what this game could be from a rivalry standpoint, that they're busing there. I like buses. Neil Brown said each guy's going to have, he said it's those buses where each guy has his own row. So it's not a school bus.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Right?
They're not taking a cheese
said,
bus from Morgantown to Cincinnati.
No, it might that's like $11, right? You can probably get there for $11. But so they are saving money. So Neil Brown said when he was at Troy, they would do this. They've done this a little bit before. Like you bus, you stop, you practice. So he did mention that this saves West Virginia some money. He didn't say it like, well, it saves money. So like he didn't say it like totally angry.
They're going to pay my buyout, so this saves money.
Yeah. They are flying back afterward, but he also was kind of saying like the flight can be cramped sometimes anyway. So this will be a nice, luxurious bus ride with a stop for a lunch and practice in the 16th largest metropolitan area in America.
Love it.
What's wrong with that?
Best casual options out the wazoo.
Oh my gosh! I hope they go to Piata. Like, yeah, for real. There are a lot of really good. It's why one of the reasons that I live in Columbus is because of the variety of like you can say that that's silly or that Doug's just joking around. For real, malls and chain restaurants. Like, why do you live where you live? It's in the top 5. Nico Marchiol will start for West Virginia. They don't have a quarterback controversy. Garrett Green's still hurt, but you can hear the discussion. Maybe it's more from the media, but you can hear the discussion, Landis, of like, well, you know what? Like, this is it for Garrett Green. If he's going to be hurt, miss a couple more games, maybe it's just time to go to Nico Marchiol. And the thing last week when he started in their last game and they beat Arizona, it wasn't last week because they're both teams coming off a bye. By the way, both teams coming off a bye. Neil Brown did say this was originally supposed to be a Thursday game, and they never got it done. And that makes me a little bit sad because I think if it was a Thursday game, you and I would have gone.
Yeah, definitely.
Just like we went to Syracuse-Pitt on Thursday. So I wish this had been a Thursday game. But he talked about the efficiency of Nico Marchiol. And that's not really what we say. Like Garrett Green is dunks and threes. Mm-hmm. It's a different style of thing. They're not putting as much on Nico Marchiol, but you can almost hear a little bit that maybe they're not upset to maybe play this way instead of letting it rip, because letting it rip has led them to 4-4.
I mean, Nico Marchiol against Arizona was better than anything that Garrett Green put out on the field this year. That's like, just call it for what it is. Maybe although Neil Brown has been pretty honest in his assessment of Garrett Green, so maybe he would say that. But I just think you got to go with the guy who's played. Even if Garrett Green was healthy, I think Nico would be the right choice for them right now.
Yeah, so that's the discussion they're going to have to continue to have for the rest of the year of if and when Garrett Green is healthy, what do you do there? By the way, they fired their defensive coordinator during the bye week. So Jordan Leslie got fired.
They did.
Jeff Koons is in. Scott Satterfield, the Cincinnati coach, was asked about that. I mean, like, it's one of those things. I actually think maybe they get a little boost here. They're not changing the structure. It's more about some of the play calls that Jeff Koons, who had been working with special teams, will be comfortable with. So it's not a wholesale change. But one of the things Neil Brown talked about for like why he made a change there, they want to be less predictable. So that's a big thing. They sort of self-scouted and thought they were predictable, and they want to force more turnovers. West Virginia's only forced 6 turnovers this year. The only power conference schools to force fewer are Purdue and Florida State, and neither of them are very good. So they feel like, now we've talked about their secondary problems all year, but I think they feel like they're stale too. So I'm a little bit intrigued about what that could do for West Virginia. Both teams talked about, Scott Satterfield was asked about this. West Virginia kind of won big last year in this game and kind of physically overwhelmed Cincinnati. So I think Cincinnati may have a chip on their shoulder a little bit about that. It kind of snowballed on them a year ago. But I think if we get if this is a little better version of West Virginia, they have a chance to go in here on the road and win. So Cincinnati was kind of, again, they're off a bye week too. So both teams are rested. They were kind of excited. Like, somebody was asking about the Joe Royer stiff arm on Travis Hunter and Scott in the last game, and Scott Satterfield, you can't ask him enough questions about Joe Royer, who's one of the best tight ends in the country. He talked about how well he's played, but he thinks he's still more there. So Cincinnati is still great offensive line. Dante Corleone's a monster defensive tackle, bunch of skill guys, and Brendan Sorsby's played well. But if West Virginia's different, then I think West Virginia can go in and win.
I don't disagree with that. And I picked Cincinnati, but I definitely picked Cincinnati nervous a little bit about them West Virginia throwing enough change-ups out there defensively to kind of keep Cincinnati kind of like on the wrong foot or whatever. Last year, this game was 42-21. West Virginia ran out to a 21-0 lead in the second quarter, and it was 42-7 by the third quarter. It was like they just totally blitzed them. And Scott Satterfield was talking a lot about like how that game is on their mind, how it left a bad taste in their mouth. I don't know if that's something they've thought about constantly, or they're just bringing it back up now that this week is happening. But I do think you're going to get a pretty good version of Cincinnati in this game. And I had just come back to they didn't change the players in West Virginia's defense, and West Virginia has the absolute worst PFF coverage grade in the country. So
the worst.
Yes,
that's not good.
So I'll take Brendan Sorsby and Cincinnati's skill throwing the ball on West Virginia enough to win the game. I have 28-24 Cincinnati.
One thing I didn't mention, Wyatt Milam, the All-American quality left tackle for West Virginia, should play in this game. He's had some injury problems. So like there was a while there where West Virginia was missing QB and left tackle.
Mm-hmm.
They have the left tackle back and the QB. They get they just sort of flatten out the play a little bit. Maybe some fewer highs, but also not as many lows. I originally picked Cincinnati, and then I changed my mind. So I am 27-25 WVU, which is basically, do you get a boost? Do you get a boost by a coaching change? And again, like there's at 4-4 and 5-3, like there's still stuff out there for both these teams. So I don't want to say, like Stephen Godfrey and I talked about this on Wednesday, like this game, he said sometimes he calls games like this anxiety bowls where both coaches might be in trouble. He said this is not that, and I agree this is not that. But it sure would be a nice win because you can point, right? They have 7 combined losses. Only one is not to a currently ranked team. And that one was like a 3-point shootout on the road against Texas Tech where Cincinnati had a field goal to tie in the last play of the game. So this is kind of like the first game where I think the loser's going to feel like, man, we were better. I think both teams right now should probably think they're better than the other team. Which means I think the loser is going to be disappointed. And I think they're going to feel that way and the fan base is going to feel that way. So this is quite a slobber knocker, which is, again, like, I don't know how it's going to go. Like, I am super fired up to watch this game. There's almost a part of me that wish I was going to this. Cincinnati's a 5-point favorite at home. This is a noon start. So
I'm sure you could get a credential and go if you wanted to.
I know. My plan is to go to Ohio State, Purdue, and I don't think I'm going to change off that. But, like, gosh, this is tempting. Whew. This is tempting. Whew. This is tempting. But I have been to Cincinnati already this year. But there's like when you start this northern stuff, again, this West Virginia schedule, the idea that West Virginia, because they're not going to play Cincinnati every year, I don't think they're scheduled to play next year because it's not a protected rivalry. That West Virginia this year played Penn State, Pitt, and Cincinnati in the first year of Kings of the North. When they're not doing that next year, of course they'll play Pitt in the backyard brawl. But like, how is that? You can't get a better West Virginia schedule than that.
It's beautiful. They should do it every year.
Yeah, I'm just gonna cry. Make myself cry. All right, quick break. When we come back, we'll get a little quicker on some other games, including like a bunch of northern playoff contenders who still need to go out and show how good they are. We'll do all that next on Kings of the North. Lesmerises and Bill Landis here on Kings of the North. If you're listening on a podcast, whoa, man, that is the best. Thank you for doing that. If you're in here live on YouTube right now, whoa, even better. If you're watching back on YouTube later, what? That's so awesome. Thank you for doing it. So if you want to drop a review anywhere, if you want to give us a thumb or subscribe on YouTube, or you want to tell a friend, or you want to drop a review on a podcast app and like say what you think about us, like we're just so grateful for the interaction, and we're so glad that you guys are here so we can talk about Northern football in a fun and interesting way. Do you know what we have in the North, Landis? I don't know if you checked this out this week. We have the number 1 team in the country.
We do. Yeah. And the number 2 team.
And the number 2 team. Do they play football in the South? I think we need to do a show in the next 2 weeks before the last week of the regular season focused on how Oregon built this, because I do not want us to get through the back half of this schedule since the Oregon-Ohio State game and not check in a super meaningful way on the number 1 team in the country that week to week, both sides of the ball is playing the best football of anybody out there. They are number 1. They deserve to be number 1. They're efficient and explosive. They're well coached. They have talent. They make adjustments. They're good on special teams. This is a complete team. And I can feel myself sometimes, even that like this is not one of the main games off the top for us. It's because Oregon is a 24.5-point favorite at home at 7 p.m. Eastern on Saturday against Maryland. So, okay, do we need extra time on that? But it's the number 1 team in the country, Bill.
Mm-hmm. And it's a duck versus turtle too. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think we should do that.
Duck versus turtle. Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Do you think they'd be friends? I think in nature, a duck and a turtle would be friends.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
You ever go to a pond? Sometimes at a pond, you'll see you see a turtle up on a rock, and then there's a duck right there, and they're just hanging out.
They're just around each other so much. How could there, if there were any animosity there, we'd know it already.
That would be a good encapsulation. We should just do this again, not to promote smoking, but if we had like a preview graphic for this game, and it was just a duck and a turtle both smoking a Signetti cigarette, because not everybody needs to smoke a Signetti cigarette. All right, injuries. Good news for Oregon this week, right? That they're talking about that the injury. Dan Lanning is saying the injuries to Tez Johnson, the great receiver and punt returner, and Marcus Harper, the right guard, is not as bad as they look, but they're both out this week. So he said there's competition. So to see how they replace these guys is one of the big stories of this game. Gary Bryant Jr., who's another good receiver who has not played, he's at the point where he could be back and help them. So Trayshawn Holden was really good last week in the last game, kind of filling the Tez Johnson spot, but they have another talented guy who has a lot of snaps under him in his career. So Gary Bryant Jr. could help at receiver. They got to find a punt returner. They said that's open. And then they also are kind of looking for the right guard. Kavika Rogers came in when Harper got hurt. They have a couple other guys there who are options, including Dave Iuli, who's a decently veteran guy who's been hurt all year. So as they've lost 2 really key offensive contributors, they actually have 2 other guys who have been hurt who now are ready to be back and could help them fill those spots. But I think that's the number 1 thing I'm watching for this game, this Oregon game, Landis, is like, how do they look filling these spots?
No discussion about Matthew Bedford, right?
No, the things that I was listening and was reading from all the great Oregon writers, they mentioned 3 people at right guard, and Matthew Bedford was not one of them.
Yeah, it did seem like they made the decision a couple weeks ago to just like shut him down for the year. I think he only has 1 year left, so they just like redshirt this year and then come back and play next year. Yeah, I want to see how Oregon handles that too. I just don't know. I don't think Maryland's the kind of team that's going to stress that anyway, right? If they were playing a different team, I think it's interesting to see how Oregon plugs the holes. I don't know that it's interesting to see whether or not it slows them down in any kind of way.
Well, but I mean, like, for instance, when Ohio State lost Josh Simmons at left tackle playing Nebraska's a solid team, but that wasn't necessarily that left tackle got stressed. You could just see that left tackle wasn't good enough.
Right. Yeah.
So I do think like if there's a hole, if they have a hole at right guard, that'll show like any Big Ten team can show that hole. So I get your point that this is not the end all be all the test, but if it's like, oh man, like nobody can get open at receiver now that Tez Johnson's not there. Yeah. Defenses completely play them a different way. You'll see a glimpse of it. So it's what I just want to see again, the respect for Oregon's offense as efficient and explosive. I just want to see if it is scaled back at all with 2 of their top 11 guys out.
I think that's fair. And also, I guess it is worth mentioning that while Oregon was trying to figure out offensive line stuff earlier in the season, like Boise State and Idaho gave them problems, right? So
yes.
And they had shuffled guys around and landed on a really good mix, and now they have to kind of go back to figure that out again.
Reshuffle.
So yeah, I shouldn't be as dismissive of that, I guess, as I was. I don't have a tremendously high opinion of Maryland at the moment.
So it's one of those things. I don't know that you can see if they have an answer, but you can see how big the question
they have a problem.
is.
Yeah.
So, good matchup. They're feeling really good about the Oregon secondary. Jabbar Muhammad's been really good, but across the board, they grade out pretty well. And that means this is an interesting matchup with Ty Felton and Caden Prather at receiver for Maryland. Ty Felton, just an absolute monster. 73 catches for 970 yards on 100 targets. Caden Prather, 45 catches for 487 yards on 65 targets. So, like, I'm curious about that matchup between the Maryland receivers and the Oregon secondary. And I did just want to cite briefly, it feels like, so Billy Edwards, like, they put MJ Morrison at the end of their last game and he led some touchdown drives, but it still feels like it's Billy Edwards. They were kind of asked about Billy Edwards threw some picks last time out, threw 2 picks, didn't have any big time throws. Completion percentage was around 50% this last game. Worst game of the year, I think. But it doesn't sound like Mike Loxley's wavering. Like, it doesn't. So I've seen people suggest that maybe MJ Morris should get real-time reps as well. But it feels like, they even got asked about one of the picks, and Mike Loxley said, well, he got hit in the chest. If we protect him, it's a touchdown. He got hit in the chest, it's a pick. So it feels like Mike Loxley is still very locked in with Billy Edwards, who's played pretty well much of the year.
Yeah, I think he should be. While Maryland can still get the bowl eligibility, right? So I think you want to roll with a guy who's been good most of the year. Maryland is number 9 in the country passing offense, just like yards per game. I know you probably should look at that as the end all be all metric for determining the quality of a passing attack. But Billy Edwards has thrown it well. The receivers are good. Oregon's pass defense, aside from the Ohio State game, has been awesome. Like, Ohio State threw for 326, and no one else has thrown for more than 200 yards on Oregon. So, like, it's kind of a weird kind of outlier there for Ohio State. But I guess I would also say that maybe Oregon hasn't seen a team that can throw it the way that Maryland has the ability to. Like, when Maryland's really locked in, throwing it around, they're pretty good. They just haven't always kind of found that stride. But if that shows up hitting, and the other part of it too is, like, Maryland was off. Mike Loxley took over the offense a couple weeks ago and intimated at the time that he had some different ideas about how Maryland should be doing things. Maybe Maryland brings something different to the table this weekend. And then the other thing with that, I guess, would be that maybe this isn't so much an advantage, or we make too much of it sometimes, but Mike Loxley was on the Alabama staff with Tosh Lupoy for 3 years. He has seen this defense.
Yeah.
I think he probably has a pretty good idea of what Oregon would like to do, at least sort of structurally, with its defense. And maybe you can find some ways to attack that too. So maybe that's a pathway for a Maryland cover. It's a pretty big spread. It's almost 4 touchdowns. But I don't know that Oregon sweats a whole lot here.
Okay. On the Maryland side, so Maryland is coming off a bye. They their last game out against Minnesota kind of didn't show up. And Damon Evans, the athletic director for Maryland, was on a radio interview. And I just want to read a quote. It's one of these quotes that's pretty honest. I don't know that it's great for your head coach when your AD saying this about you. We've got to stop being inconsistent. We've been too inconsistent. Some might say that we've been consistently inconsistent. When your boss calls your team that is not great. There are glimpses of us playing extremely well, and then there are times when we look like a different football team. So cutting down on the mistakes. And I know people are tired of hearing that, but I'm going to keep saying it. We've got to cut down on the mistakes because we're not the type of team that can overcome mistakes. And when I say mistakes, we can't turn the ball over. We can't add penalties. We can't take ourselves out of scoring position, whether it be a field goal or an opportunity to have a touchdown. And then we've got to go into the game ready to play. Against Minnesota, we just looked like we weren't ready to play. And before you know it, we're down 21-0. And I don't care what team you're playing in the Big Ten. When you're playing a Big Ten opponent and you get down 21-0, it's hard to come back from that type of deficit. That got real. Mm-hmm. That got real for Damon Evans to say that publicly about the football team and head coach Mike Loxley. So be consistent and not looking like you're not ready to play. And when you say, like, he's intimating they have the talent and the ability and they're not doing it. Because sometimes you can say like, well, we've got to do better in NIL. We've got to hit like he's laying it out there. There are glimpses of us playing extremely well. I think when you have an AD talking about glimpses of being really good, he's implying that the coach is not bringing it out of them often enough. I think that's squarely on Mike Locksley. I'm not saying this is any kind of hot seat conversation, but it feels like he was sending a message there.
I don't know that it's a hot seat situation, but we've talked about Mike Locksley and how comfortable he is. That makes me rethink maybe a little bit how comfortable he might be if AD is willing to say that.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I think Mike Locksley overall has done a good job there. They've elevated the standard, I think, at Maryland, and now they have to go cash some stuff in, and they're just in a position where they're trying to get bowl eligible, and 2 of their final 4 games are against Penn State and Oregon. So, all right. Saturday night, I briefly pondered this one too as a trip. Florida State at Notre Dame, 7:30 Eastern. Notre Dame a 26-point favorite against 1-8 Florida State, brother. Woo!
What a score pick from you. This game in the preseason was Notre Dame as a 4.5-point favorite. Woo. And when I looked on Thursday morning, it was Notre Dame as a 26.5-point favorite, which tells you all you need to know about how these two seasons have gone. Notre Dame is 5th in the country in scoring margin at plus 24.5. Florida State is 116th in the country in scoring margin at minus 12.9 points per game. This was a game I was really looking forward to, and now I just like what it almost feels silly to break it down more than like Notre Dame's really good, Florida State stinks, Florida State can't stop the run, Notre Dame's going to run it down their throat. Like I don't know if there's much more. Like, is there any chance that Florida State is going to find a level that it has not found at any point this season and make this a game? I just don't know that it's going to happen, right? Like, why would it be now? I don't.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's remarkable. This is a case to be studied in the portal era of what has happened to Florida State. You noticed that my score is 51-15. Can I tell you why I picked 15 for Florida State?
Please.
Because these are Florida State's 9-point totals from this season so far. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
11-12, 13-13, 14-14, 16-16, 21. So I just wanted to give them a score they haven't gotten yet. You ever play Racco? You ever play that game Racco? You know what that is?
I don't know what that is. No.
Racco is a card game where you have like 10 spots to fill in, and it's just numbered cards. It might be like 1 to 60, but the point is that you've got to put the numbers in order. So it's a lot of strategic stuff of like, okay, I have like number 17 in my number 3 spot. Now I have number 21 in my number 4 spot, but that's not enough of a gap because there's not many cards in there. So I'm going to replace I'm playing Racco with Florida State. I'm trying to squeeze a 15 right in there. And I just think Mike Norvell, you know what? If he's down 51-7 and they score in the final 4 minutes, I just think he's going to be aggressive there and go for 2 and try to cut it to 51-15 and cut it to 7 scores instead of 8 or whatever the math would be. This is, I actually think in the end for Notre Dame with where they are and what their playoff positioning is, will they take the fact that Florida State stinks? They're 10th in the playoff rankings. They still have a ranked game against Army. They don't need the juice. Like, we thought this would be a ranked versus ranked game, but I think Notre Dame will take, all right, we'll just play crap. Same thing with USC at the end of the year. We're playing big name brands who stink. It's okay with us. They stink. We just need to get to 11-1 and we're 1,000% in the playoff. I'm giving them some style points with my 51-15 pick, but it's not like they have to go beat a good team to impress the committee because they're fine.
No, but they might need to hammer these teams to impress them. Like I agree that Notre Dame at 11-1 is almost certainly in the playoff field, but I don't know that you want to leave anything to chance, right? We've talked about like the 11-1 Indiana and 11-1 Pitt and like how nervous we are about that. Neither one of those teams lost to Northern Illinois, right? So true. I think Notre Dame is fine as long as it wins, but maybe there should be a little more worry / urgency there, which is why if there's an opportunity to win these games 51-15, I think Notre Dame will certainly take the opportunity to do that.
What's your pick?
I have 35-10 only because maybe there's not enough possessions to get to a 51, but I don't think Notre Dame has any trouble running the ball. Florida State is 88th in yards per carry allowed, 122nd in total rushing yards allowed, 91st in rushing touchdowns allowed, 113th in EPA per rush. 5 of 9 opponents have rushed for 200 plus plus yards this year, and it is coming off allowing a season high 289 rushing yards to UNC.
What happened? What happened? Oh my God, what happened? Okay. Next game, Purdue at Ohio State, Saturday, noon Eastern, in the shoe. Ohio State favored by 38.
Mm-hmm.
Ohio State won this game 41-7 last year. This remains, just for people who aren't totally aware of this, the Purdue-Ohio State last 20 years is one of the wackier series in college football. Between 2004 and 2018, they played 9 games. Purdue won 4, and one of the Ohio State wins was in overtime. So that's it's practically 4-4-1 between Purdue and Ohio State, when Ohio State is like making national championship games and dominating the Big Ten, and Purdue's playing them to a stalemate, basically. And that does not include the fact that 2003 was an overtime win for Ohio State, and 2002 was the Holy Buckeye Miracle game. Mm-hmm. So Purdue is just a thorn, but this is not that Purdue. So I'm picking 41-6. I didn't even realize when I made my pick that last year was 41-7. It's just tough for Purdue. They lost in overtime to Northwestern last week. They did start last week's game rotating quarterbacks. The first 4 series, Ryan Brown and Hudson Card each got 2 series. Hudson Card played better. He took over, played the rest of the game, probably had his best game. He will start and be the guy this week against Ohio State. Ryan Walters said Ryan Brown will still work in, but it's no longer a quarterback share. I kind of was looking forward to maybe Hudson Card having a really good year 2 as a transfer at Purdue. It has not played out that way. He had missed 2 games in concussion protocol, which is how Ryan Brown got in and why they wound up in a quarterback share for a moment. So I don't know. Like a little bit of Hudson Card, and they've, like he's got his feet back under him. Ryan Walters, the defensive head coach, is calling the plays. They've been running some more gimmick plays and stuff like that. Ryan Walters said this that he wants to find a way to keep teams off guard and get explosive yards. So like they're willing to do that. I don't know, Landis. This is a whitewashing, but like, I don't know. A little bit of Hudson Card. I don't know.
I don't know. No.
Okay. Nope.
I don't think it's a name your score game, I think, for Ohio State. But I also think Ryan Day would be pretty eager to get some starters out here if he can. Tyleik Williams is banged up. He probably will still play, but I guess there's a chance he doesn't play. Lathan Ransom, I think, came back faster from a foot injury in the Oregon game than people thought he would. So like you can get him out of the game. You get him out of the game. Rest up Quinshon Judkins, Travion. Like I think you'll see Ohio State play in a way where it can play the second half without its starters in the game.
Yeah.
I think they really want to play that kind of game, I'm expecting a fast start from Ohio State, and I have 52-7.
Yeah, this is just an interesting spot in the schedule where Ohio State goes. They had a top 5 game with Oregon. They had a bye week, not a great game against Nebraska. They play a top 5 game with Penn State. Now they have 2 games where they overwhelm opponents from a talent perspective with Purdue and Northwestern before they get Indiana. So this is a chance for them to rest and reset a little bit. They think they're feeling pretty good after the Penn State win. So I think name your score is right. And then it's just like, what do you think Ohio State wants to name if you're going to bet this game at -38? I have it as a 35-point win. You have it as a 45-point win. So I think you're just you're guessing, can Purdue pop something to get a trick play that gets them a score? Is there a goofy turnover? And when does Ryan Day decide to put in his backups? So that's where we are.
Backup scored against Purdue last year. Devin Brown threw a touchdown pass to Brandon Ennis in that game.
Okay.
Late. Yeah.
All right. Next one up is Syracuse at BC. It's a northern matchup in the ACC, Saturday, noon Eastern. Boston College is favored by 2 at home against Cuse. I'm a little surprised by that line.
I'm very surprised by it. So Syracuse leads the all-time series 24-23. It's a good regional rival. I think both teams are approaching it as such. It's a chance for Boston College to get even in the all-time series here. But BC has lost 3 in a row. Syracuse, I thought, showed a little something last week in beating Virginia Tech, has been a better team than BC for the majority of the year. Why is Boston College favored?
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of this to a lesser degree of like, why was UCF favored over BYU? I don't know. I think our impressions of the teams would not match up with. We understand BC's at home, but I think Syracuse is probably like a touchdown better team than Boston College. So I think Syracuse should be favored by 3 instead of being a 2-point dog.
That's kind of how I feel. I guess if it's like there have been times this year where Syracuse has struggled to protect Kyle McCord, and it'll have to figure out Donovan Ezeraku.
Yes, our guy.
So if you look at Donovan Ezeraku over the last couple of games, from a pressure standpoint, he's been about on par with what he has been, but he only has 1 sack in the last 3 games and none in the last 2 games. So I don't know if that's teams chipping him more, figuring him out a little bit. He hasn't really, in my opinion, like taken over games.
You think it's teams watching Kings of the North and our interview with him and realizing what a great player he is, and they have to account for him?
You made him go through sack by sack what his thought process was, and then every team they face since then just like catalog that. That's how they're going to defend him now. So it's your fault.
Yeah. Wow. I am actually feeling terrible about that now. Whoops.
Yeah, I do like if it is a Donovan Ezeraku game, then I think BC can win, right? I from a talent standpoint, they're probably two fairly evenly matched teams. Kyle McCord is playing better than Thomas Castellanos this year. And these are 2
quarterbacks, both very capable of turning the ball over. So this Thomas Castellanos made a bunch of turnovers in the first half of Virginia Tech that Boston College was moving the ball up and down the field, and it took him out of the game. And then Kyle McCord threw 5 picks against Pitt, like the game was over before it started. So if you get that kind of game from either quarterback, then it's done. And both are capable of that. And both are also capable of absolutely making big time plays.
Yeah, and Boston College's defense does have 11 interceptions this year, which is tied for the 5th most in the country. So they've been a little opportunistic when they've been given those opportunities. I thought it was encouraging the way that Syracuse was able to run the ball a little bit against Virginia Tech. LaQuint Dallin had a really good game there. The team as a total had 130 yards and 3 touchdowns. So that is something I think we've been waiting to kind of round in the form for Syracuse this year, and maybe it's starting to just like you got to help Kyle McCord a little bit. Like if my guy has to go out there and throw the ball 55 times a game, like it's just a hard way to live. So maybe that is starting to come together for Syracuse. I think maybe it is a little bit, and I just really I think Syracuse is just playing much better at the Pitt game notwithstanding, and has done so for more of the season than Boston College has. So I'm picking Syracuse on the road 31-27.
Yeah. Again, yeah. I mean, Syracuse beat Stanford. They're right there in the ACC race right now. And then instead they're a step behind. But I have Syracuse 34-24. BYU at Utah. It's the Holy War. Man, I wish I was going. I will get there eventually. It's a 10-15.
It's another weird spread. I thought
it is.
Spread. Yeah.
It's a 10-15 Eastern start Saturday night. BYU, and again, this is the books just are not respecting BYU. Favored by 3.5 at Utah, but Utah's season has fallen apart, and BYU is one of the 2 stories of college football this year. They're undefeated. So I have BYU winning this big, 37-17. The reason I picked that, Bill, is that BYU has not won by more than 10 in this matchup since 1996. Since then, Utah has a 16-7 edge overall, but like those 7 wins for BYU have all been pretty close. Most have been 1-score games. So in 1996, BYU won 37-17. So I picked that score here.
Oh, look at that. Little history. Yeah. That's
a Landis special. That's how you would do it.
Yeah. That's good. I like that. I didn't put that much thought into my score pick. I have BYU 28-12. Utah switching quarterbacks again. Brandon Rose going to start for Utah this weekend.
They're searching. It is. I don't even know. They don't have an answer at quarterback anymore. Right. Even that, like we'll get to Iowa in a second. I mean, they're more like Iowa maybe got to something. It took a while with Brendan Sullivan. I think once Cam Rising got hurt, Utah's in the Michigan basket, which is like there is no answer. So you're just trying to pick a different answer, a different question each week, but it's not an answer. So maybe instead of true freshman Isaac Wilson, but that would have been, I mean, like Isaac Wilson, that's Zach Wilson's brother. Zach Wilson was a quarterback at BYU. Yeah. Isaac Wilson's a true freshman. Like this would have been awesome for him to play in the Holy War, but he'll have time to do that. I'm a little intrigued. BYU's run it for more than 200 yards in the last 2 games. You've talked a lot about the BYU rushing attack with LJ Martin and Hinckley Rapata both getting healthy. Utah's defense is number 4 in run defense success rate in the Power Four, like Junior Tafuna and some other guys in the middle, like they still can play the run a little bit. I'm a little intrigued about that. I think my score is like BYU just grinding them down. And BYU is a fun team because they will just like keep after it. Jake Retzloff will scramble on you. Kalani Sitake will call a trick play. And then also they're really, now that Martin and Rapata are both healthy, their run game has reached another level. And so I think Utah, that might be the best thing that Utah still does. Utah still has a decent offensive line and stuff too. They just can't. They're just not functional throwing the ball. So I think this is I would be very comfortable with taking BYU -3.5 here. I'm not exactly sure how it's a game unless, I mean, Utah would have to get its best quarterback play of the year for it to be a game.
Yeah, and if it's a game, it's like 17-10. Like,
yes,
Utah. I think Utah's defense is still quite good and has been done no favors by its offense for the second straight year being unable to hold up its end of the bargain.
Yeah.
17 points allowed to Houston and you lost. 13 points allowed to TCU and you lost. The most it's given up this year is 27 points in a loss to Arizona State. It's the number 11 scoring defense in the country because they're good. And maybe this is a real challenge for BYU to put up points here. I just have a terribly difficult time seeing Utah score more than like 2 touchdowns unless Utah really brings something new into this game. I do think Utah's offensive line is pretty good. Mekhi Bernard has been good this year, but also not nearly as good as he was in the beginning of the year. And I don't think it's his fault. I think it's the fact that they don't have a quarterback. They rushed for 825 yards in their first 4 games and have rushed for 382 in the 4 since.
Wow.
So Utah pathway, like control the line of scrimmage, play your stingy defense. Maybe you get a special teams splash players or a defensive score or something like that. And then I think you have BYU potentially in the danger zone. But even if it is a grind for BYU, I just, again, I can't see Utah just like playing it straight up and scoring enough to win the game.
Yeah. Jay Weber, Jay Hill from Weber State. Jay Hill, the defensive coordinator. Sorry. Jay Hill, the defensive coordinator for BYU, is like a Utah guy through and through, went to play at Utah, was a former assistant at Utah. That BYU defense is playing really well. Like he's going to really want to come out and win this game. There's a lot here. I think I've felt a lot of people felt some frustration from Utah that like the players who are there working their butts off every day. And for the second straight year, like quarterback injuries have torpedoed the season. Mm-hmm. I know it's a home game for Utah, but if BYU gets up early, I don't know that Utah, even in a rivalry, I don't know how much fight they have left. And I almost wouldn't blame them. It has really been tough. I'm not saying they're going to give up, but like we've seen what it's like when BYU like blitzes people, not with a blitz, but like just gets after you. And all of a sudden BYU scores 21 points in 8 minutes. And like, if that happens, I think they're just going to take, they're like Utah's right to have that happen to them. So that's why I have it pretty comfortable for the Cougs, 37-17. Minnesota at Rutgers, noon Eastern Saturday. Minnesota is a 6-point road favorite, Bill.
Would you like to hear all of the familiarity between these two programs? Starting,
Greg Schiano loves to lake vacations in Minnesota. Is that one of them?
He's a Jersey guy. He's not a lake guy. He's got to be an ocean guy.
That's true.
It starts with the fact that PJ Fleck famously worked for Greg Schiano. Like I think Greg Schiano has been a very influential person in PJ Fleck's career. He worked for him at Rutgers. He worked for him with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yep.
Rutgers offensive coordinator Kirk Shiraka was on PJ Fleck's staff at Minnesota. Rutgers defensive coordinator Joe Harasimiak was also on PJ Fleck's staff at Minnesota. Minnesota defensive coordinator Corey Heatherman was the Rutgers linebackers coach last year and for 2 years prior to coming to Minnesota. Rutgers quarterback Ethan Kaliakmanis is a Minnesota transfer and one of 3 former Minnesota players on Rutgers roster. These teams love each other.
Yeah. This is like this is like team swap here. This is like this is wild. That's wild. And like the Ethan Kaliakmanis part of it, I think, is the most interesting. That I think PJ Fleck looked at Ethan Kaliak-Manis last year and was like, I don't know if this is good enough. And Greg Schiano looked at Ethan Kaliak-Manis from afar and was like, that is good enough. Get over here.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I don't want to talk out of school here. I was reading PJ Fleck's transcript. I didn't watch the press conference. So it's possible that stuff was left out of the transcript. But there was a question about Ethan Kaliak-Manis in which his name was never said. Like it wasn't in the question or in the answer, which I thought was kind of odd. Like just reading it, I sensed some like tension in the answer about how that relationship between Ethan Kaliak-Manis and Minnesota ended.
Okay.
But I think,
but it worked out for Minnesota.
Yeah,
they're thrilled with Max Brosmer. Yeah,
it worked out for both of them, I think, because Ethan Kaliak-Manis is playing better in a different situation too. Not to say maybe in this current situation with Minnesota he'd be playing better than he was last year because Minnesota has really found its stride here. Greg Schiano called Minnesota one of the hottest teams in America.
They are.
And
you must watch KOTN.
He must.
That's how we talk about him.
I think that continues here because I don't know what Rutgers' health situation is.
I feel like that's all we talk about with Rutgers anymore. It's like Rutgers, whose entire defense is hurt,
Well, so a lot of those guys did play the last time Rutgers played. The only one who didn't play was Wesley Bailey, one of the starting defensive ends. Aaron Lewis, the other starting defensive end, did play, but he only played 14 snaps. And then Kyle Monungai left that game against USC with I think maybe a concussion. And Greg Schiano doesn't talk about injuries throughout the week. I think this would be a bigger line in favor of Minnesota if there was an expectation that Kyle Monungai wasn't going to play. So I'm assuming he will
Sam
play.
Brown, their backup running back, is also out for the year.
Yeah. So I'm assuming that he's going to play based off what this line is. But yeah, to Greg Schiano's point, Minnesota is one of the hottest teams in the country, and Rutgers has lost 4 in a row, and the last 3 teams they played have averaged 40 points a game on them. So I just kind of think it just got away from Rutgers, and they're not going to get it back.
Yeah. I have 27-16 Minnesota.
28-21 Minnesota.
Iowa State at Kansas. This is 3:30 Eastern on Saturday. Iowa State is a 3-point road favorite, and this is where Landis is going to get a little loose, and I see it. I have Iowa State 26-21, but you are picking Kansas, and is it because you think Kansas is back? That Kansas was gone? Except Kansas was gone, kind of, but also this is Kansas's losses this year. 6 to Illinois, 3 to UNLV, 4 to West Virginia, 9 to TCU, 6 to Arizona State. Then they had a bye and beat the snot out of Houston off the bye, 42-14. Then they lost by 2 to Kansas State. So they have they have 5 losses by less than a touchdown. And when they came off a bye last time, they destroyed a Houston team that actually is playing better in the second half of the year, and Kansas is off a bye. And Iowa State is coming off a very tough loss, and Lance Leipold has a history of being pretty good off of byes.
He's 4-0.
Last year, Kansas beat number 6 Oklahoma off a bye. In 2022, they got the bowl eligibility by thumping Oklahoma State by 21 off a bye. There is Leipold off a bye, Iowa State off a tough loss. They're playing this in Arrowhead in the Chiefs Stadium. So, again, Kansas is not in its home stadium this year because of construction, but it's an NFL stadium. It could be a little juice. I think, the Iowa State guys this week were getting asked about that. This is quite a situation between, I think, 2 very good head coaches and in 2 very different spots. Off a bye, can you take advantage of it? Off a tough loss, can you motivate your team to not get, to use the loss, a 1-point loss to Texas Tech last week for Iowa State? Can you use that to rise up? Probably going to come down to whether Jalen Daniels turns the ball over or not, which is what took Kansas out of games early in the year. He threw 8 picks in the first 5 games. He's only thrown 1 pick in the last 3, but the turnover-worthy plays are basically the same. So maybe he's just getting a little luckier. Iowa State had their most penalties of the season last week in the Texas Tech loss. They had a fumble in the red zone in the 3rd quarter that really killed them. Iowa State's been really good in the margins. Still injured at linebacker. That's nothing new. I think they find a way to squeak it out 26-21 in a super competitive game. But I think this is a great little upset spot that maybe you have zeroed in on here.
Yeah. So I have Kansas 31-28 for you. You basically laid out my case for it. I think Jalen Daniels has played better coming off of the bye, and maybe to your point, maybe he's just getting lucky. He's running the ball more too.
Yep.
I think maybe is a thing that is more in my mind than perhaps the turnovers throughout the course of the season, throughout the course of Kansas losing. Like Lance Leipold has said, like we're not changing our plan. We know our plan works. We got to improve here, but like we're not going to scrap everything we've done because as you mentioned, like they're not getting blown off the field in any of these games, which I guess in hindsight, maybe it's good that he didn't panic because I was kind of wanting him to at times.
We love
throughout
panic.
the year.
We love
yeah.
So
they haven't. They played really well against Houston. I thought showed up well against Kansas State and just didn't win that rivalry game. So I just think that they are a better team than they were a couple of weeks ago. It is coming off of the week off. It's Iowa State's run defense. I don't think being that good. So it's like here, Jalen Daniels has run it more. Devin Neal's a really good running back. Kansas, while struggling this year, has maintained a position as one of the better rushing offenses in the country. And I have once Kansas came off that bye week and thumped Houston. I have had it on my mind that Kansas will have a role to play in the Big 12 title race, even if it is not itself going to be in it because of who it has to play, who it had to play. Who played Kansas State, now it's play Iowa State.
And if you did not catch this on Tuesday or Wednesday when we talked about this, both Utah and Kansas, who were very hot, Utah was the preseason favorite. Kansas was picked number 4 in the Big 12. They're not in the race, but in the final month, both those teams play all 3 contenders. So Kansas and Utah, they all play Iowa State, not all 3 contenders because BYU has a pretty easy path, but they all play BYU, Colorado, and Iowa State. No, I'm saying this wrong. I had it right the first time. All 3, Utah and Kansas, and 3, 2, 1. Oh, wait, it's a live show. Sorry. Both Utah and Kansas in the final month, they play BYU, Colorado, and Iowa State. So that somebody's going to have a role here. That's 6 games, Landis.
Yeah.
Like to think that like one time at least one of those former favorites is going to get somebody. Look at Mike, by the way. Mike bringing a graphic back from the middle of the week, Landis. That's how you produce a show. You're calling your shot here. I think it's a nice call. I think it's a nice call, but also like Kansas, Colorado has a chance to be a banger in a couple of weeks too.
Sure. Yeah. I will. I guess I will feel this way about all the games remaining among those teams. I don't know that I'll pick the upset. I don't think they'll pick the upset every time, but I actually think Iowa State losing the way it lost last week they might still be a little shell shocked from that. And I was more than mildly concerned about the ease with which Texas Tech moved the ball down the field on Iowa State's offense when it had to win the game.
I mean, Matt Campbell was asked about it this week. He sort of talked about it after the loss, that it's really been a grind down the team. They're still down like 3 of their top 5 linebackers. And like that's like at the heart of the defense. There's just like a hole there. That's not their fault, but they, I mean, when you're getting down to like you're playing your 7th linebacker or whatever at times, they're just playing some really young guys without much experience. And I think it takes a toll. But as I stumbled through trying to explain the Kansas-Utah thing, Utah turned out not to be Utah because of a quarterback injury, and that quarterback is done for the year. So there's still some fundamentals of Utah that we already talked about, but like the big thing's not going to change. Kansas turned out not to be Kansas because Jalen Daniels maybe was a little bit rusty coming off last year, and it just got loose, and he turned the ball over so much, it took them out of otherwise close games early. If that stops, and it, maybe it is, then Kansas has a better chance, I think, in November to get back to the real Kansas. They have a better chance than Utah does. Do you agree with that Kansas is probably the more dangerous of the 2?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm still going to pick Iowa State 26-21, and you have 31-28 Kansas. All right. Virginia at Pitt. Prime time, 8 Eastern on Saturday. Pitt is a 7.5-point home favorite against the Cavaliers.
Yeah, this should be, and I think needs to be, an Eli Holstein bounce back spot. In his last 4 games, 59.4% completion, 6.5 yards per attempt, 5 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 12 turnover-worthy plays, which leads the country over that span. Pat Narduzzi was asked a lot about that this week, and just the dip in play from Eli Holstein that has been evident to everyone who's watched Pitt play. He said part of it was Cal and Syracuse and SMU changing up some of their defenses and stuff they saw on film and stuff they refed was not necessarily what they saw on the field in those games. He said they got to run it better. They said they got to protect them better. Left tackle was a huge issue, I thought, against SMU with Branson Taylor out. They kind of weathered it against Syracuse, and then they really could not handle it against SMU. So there are other things that are impacting the play of Eli Holstein, but he's also a redshirt freshman and going through a full season, and people probably have figured him out a little bit too. But Virginia has one of the worst pass defenses in the country. It needs to happen here, I think, and like a Pitt can probably win this game without it. But I think to have confidence that it can finish this season 11-1, it needs to see a much better version of Eli Holstein in this game than it has gotten over the last month or so.
Are you more kind of a little out on Pitt after the SMU loss, or are you looking at that more of like kind of a one-off, long trip on the road? SMU got rolling, stuff happens.
I'm pulling back a little bit on Pitt. I think we got a little hot on the defense after the Syracuse game. Yeah, we were there, man. When you're there and you see 3 pick sixes, what are you supposed to do? Not get excited about it? It was a lovely night in Pittsburgh. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so what are we supposed to do?
Quirky diner. We were high off syrup. We're just like feeling it. Like, I don't know. I think we're gonna be back in Pittsburgh for a home playoff game in the first round, and we are coming back to this diner.
Yeah. So I think clearly a little off base with the defense there, and the offense just hasn't played well for 5 games now. So like that, you have a average defense maybe and an offense that I think has potential to be very good, but just like it's kind of lost its way a little bit. So I'm not all the way out, but I'm definitely I am pulled myself much farther back from where I was after that Syracuse game.
I'm happy to be sucked back in if Pitt rolls, right? So I have 30-20 Pitt over Virginia. Like, we're not giving up on Nardog, but like, you know, we also understand that, like, you know, sometimes you go to a game and coach comes on your show and you're just like, man, these guys. It's like, oh, okay. Like they're fallible. They're not perfect. 30-20 Pitt. What's your score again?
35-24 Pitt.
Okay. One more Northern game to talk about. This is a Friday night game. This is our Northern Friday night game. It is UCLA hosting Iowa. This is Friday at 9 Eastern. Iowa is a 6.5-point favorite on the road. This is Brendan Sullivan starting again for Iowa at quarterback. He started last week against Wisconsin, and he dropped back 14 times, and they called run plays 52 times. He only threw 10 passes. He was 7 of 10 for 93 yards. They did get Caleb Johnson doing his thing. He ran 25 for 135 and 3 scores last week. So I think this is a more interesting game than people, like if you just looked at the records, than people might realize.
I think so.
UCLA early in the front half of the year lost 5 straight games. Going by the current playoff rankings, these were their losses. To number 8 Indiana, number 15 LSU, number 1 Oregon, number 6 Penn State, and then they lost to 6-3 Minnesota in a game where Minnesota had to come back and win it at the end. So I kind of thought UCLA was in the running with Purdue to be the worst team in the Big Ten, and they are not looking like that at all. They have now won 2 straight against Rutgers and Nebraska, and the last 4 weeks, there is a bye in there for UCLA, so it's been 3 games. Ethan Garbers, the UCLA quarterback by PFF, in the last 4 weeks, is the number 3 rated quarterback in the country behind Max Brosmer at Minnesota and Curtis Rourke at Indiana. So, like, UCLA's found something, but I also think Iowa with Brendan Sullivan might have found something. So I'm intrigued by 2 teams that might have found something. I think Iowa's found it more. So I have Iowa 31-16, but you think it's a little closer.
Yeah, UCLA's strength of schedule is 6th in the country.
Great for their playoff resume. I really hope the committee respects them.
Yeah, me too. I think it's right for Iowa to move on to Brendan Sullivan. I'm excited that Iowa has done that. I still don't think he's a tremendous passer. I don't know how much better that portion of Iowa's offense is actually going to be moving forward. And UCLA's run defense is really good. So I don't think Iowa runs wild here and puts up the 40s it has been putting up on other teams. That we have seen Iowa put up the 40s. I don't think we've acknowledged the fact that Iowa is tied with Penn State at 30.8 points per game for the 4th most in the Big Ten behind Indiana, Ohio State, and Oregon. They averaged 15 points per game last year, and they're averaging 30 points per game this year.
So let me ask a question. If they still can't really throw the ball that well, they do have an excellent running back in their offensive line, can get it done and help clear holes for Caleb Johnson. What do you think is the difference between Iowa's offense last year and Iowa's offense this year that has allowed them to double their average point total?
I don't know. Who's calling it? Did they switch who's calling it?
I'm not aware. I'm not really familiar with the
up.
play callers for the Iowa offense. So Tim Lester's a success, right? Like, are we there? I think we're there.
I think he's a success, and I also think if you're an Iowa fan, like it didn't happen this year, but I think you can take the success that has happened this year and think to yourself, like they're going to be able to add some more passing on top of it with Tim Lester's background with receivers and quarterbacks, right? So I think that's coming. I think they're in a really good spot with their offense. I just think UCLA's defense does the thing well that will keep Iowa from going nuts. So I'm going to pick Iowa 24-21, but I'm also going to make this prediction. We don't talk about UCLA. They're not in the South, but they're not in the North. UCLA is going to lose this game and then win its last 3 and be bowl eligible. It's going to beat Washington, USC, and Fresno State.
What a story that would be for Deshaun Foster, who is just really credit for like keeping that together when you're a first-year head coach and you end up. I mean, we're kind of making fun of the fact that Indiana at UCLA was the first ever Big Ten regular season game for one of the West Coast teams, and it turns out, it was actually a statement game for the number one story in college football to have Indiana go play that. But they just had a sledgehammer schedule. And Deshaun Foster didn't let it get south on them, and Ethan Garbers didn't let it. So, I think a lot of credit around there that we're talking about this as an interesting Friday night game, and UCLA's season is not a lost season. All right, quick. Oh, what is this? The over. Mike says the over is 8-1 in Iowa games this year when you're betting the total there. Wow.
This totals 44.5. So we're both on it.
I mean, there are people who built houses on Iowa unders for like 3, 5, 8 years, right?
And now they're putting in the in-ground pool on the over.
Yeah. Can you imagine? Man, if there are people out there can you imagine people who?
Is there like some guy who lives like in Arizona, just has a dope house that he built on Iowa unders, and then he's got an in-ground pool with a Hawkeye logo on the bottom of it that he's built on Iowa overs this year? Yeah, I want to meet that guy.
What?
His name's Ari Wasserman.
Yeah. What a world. What a world to be good at betting. I wonder what that would be like. When we come back, 2 Kramnik games, a G5 game, and our Dragon Statue picks. All of that on Kings of the North. It's getting the Dragon Statue ready here on Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis. We're so happy you're joining us here on this Thursday. G5 game, Landis. I'm intrigued by this. Yeah. Army at North Texas. North Texas puts up a boatload of points. Army is still undefeated. Army is a 5.5-point road favorite Saturday at 3:30. The total for this game is at 63.5. T-Shoes had stats this year about like totals that high, at least for a while. We're going under like 60%. I guess the question is who's the quarterback for Army? Because I took on our betting show last week, we've been talking about how good Army was against the spread. They'd covered 6 straight, and then they had a push. And I think last week was the first week they didn't cover, but it's because like I made the pick on our show, and it was like, oh, the quarterback's not playing. I was like, what? So they still completely like dominated Air Force. I think it was 20-3 with a backup quarterback, but that would be a tough thing if the QB's not playing this week against North Texas, who likes to score.
Yeah, so Bryson Daly, Jeff Monken said on Bryson Daly earlier this week that his health is improving. We anticipate that he'll be able to practice before the end of the week. There's a chance. I'm optimistic. If he can't play, it'll be Dwayne Coleman, who did start last week against Air Force. Yeah, I made a pick assuming Bryson Daly is going to play. I think it was an illness. I don't think it was an injury that kept him out of that game against Air Force. So I'm anticipating that he's playing. Tell me if you like this clash of styles. North Texas has the 4th most passing attempts in the country and is number 5 in pace of play. Army leads the country with 422 rushing attempts and is dead last in pace of play.
Wow. Oh, everyone loves clash of styles. I think Army wins that. Like, who's going to be able to dictate? I would bet on Army, even with the backup QB.
I am likewise betting on Army. The game to be played on Army's terms, I guess. and it will run the ball and hold the ball and hope that Chandler Morris, who's having a great year for North Texas, the former Oklahoma and TCU quarterback who leads the country in passing yards per game and is second in passing touchdowns, just don't give him the ball enough for North Texas to score 40 points, because it is one of 7 FBS teams who scores 40 points per game. It's like, as you mentioned, this team can really light up a scoreboard. Army has as well. Army would also be over 40 points if not for last week. So Army can score, and Army has been explosive. So maybe it does become the weirdest shootout you've ever seen with North Texas throwing the ball and an Army running the ball. But I think Army limits the possessions, still scores because that's good. It's been good at that, but doesn't allow North Texas to go crazy. I have 35-20. I did consider changing the score to maybe bring it down a little bit, but I'll roll with what I had.
I will note that the best team that North Texas played this year is Texas Tech, and they lost 66-21.
Yeah. North Texas has also lost 2 in a row. They're 5-3 and 2-2 in the American, but they've lost their last 2 games to Memphis and Tulane.
Yeah. So, all right, cram it doubleheader of the highest regard. It's not quite Alabama, Tennessee, and Georgia, Texas like we had a couple weeks ago, but it's close. The first one is Georgia at Ole Miss, Saturday, 3:30 Eastern. Georgia on the road is a 2.5-point favorite, and we're both picking Ole Miss. I have 33-27. You have 27-24. I originally picked Georgia, and then I was like, what am I doing? Why do I not want to do things to make myself happy? I'm just going to pick Ole Miss.
The thing with that is, if Georgia wins, then we can stop talking about Ole Miss.
I know, but
what's more important for the agenda of the show, Georgia losing or getting out a fraudulent SEC playoff contender?
So this is very conflicting. Yeah. And I admit this, but rooting against Georgia is higher on our list. And I still think Ole Miss, if you can lose to Kentucky, you can lose to anybody, because as we like to remind people on here, Kentucky blows. So I think I'd prefer Ole Miss win this and then just have another stupid loss. They can lose to Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl and screw up the SEC that way. But I like giving Georgia a second loss right now. And also, Ole Miss is chucking it all over the place. And they've had some guys who have been hurt that might be able to play this week. And also Carson Beck has thrown more picks in the last month than anybody in college football. So it's like, I just don't want people to think that Jackson Dart should win the Heisman, but I'm very comfortable with thinking Jackson Dart is better than Carson Beck. I'll take Ole Miss. Yeah.
Ole Miss, number 1 in the country in defensive havoc rate, and Carson Beck stinks against pressure. So that's good if you want to pick Ole Miss. Did you see what Lane Kiffin did, by the way, this week with the injury report?
Oh, they put 26 guys on it?
Yeah, because they've been getting a lot of flack from the SEC for guys faking injuries to slow down the game. So he put 26 players, 11 of whom are listed as probable and 7 listed as questionable on their injury report this week. Trey Harris, I don't think he's going to play. He hasn't played the last.
You don't think he's going to? Okay.
He's doubtful. He's listed as doubtful.
Okay.
It seems like maybe he's not going to play, which would be a huge deal for Ole Miss.
Yeah.
But I'm still picking Ole Miss anyway.
All right, so I do think I feel like the last couple weeks, which is great. We've had a lot of Northern stuff to talk about. We haven't, like on the Saturday show, talked as much. Well, I think on the postgame show on Saturday at 11, especially as the second Kramnik game, Bama LSU is ending, but also what happened in Ole Miss, Georgia. All of this matters in the playoff race and it affects Northern teams. Mm-hmm. I think we'll talk at least a little bit about some of these Southern games on Saturday night. The last Kramnik game, LSU and Alabama. LSU at home, Saturday night, 7:30 Eastern. Why is Bama favored in this game in Death Valley? I'm confused by that also, that Bama is a 2.5-point favorite, because I don't think Bama's good anymore.
I think there's a thought that Bama is healthier, and in particular Jalen Milroe is healthier and might play better here, and that Alabama's defense might be in a little better shape for this one than it has been the last couple of times it's been out there. I considered picking Alabama. I actually think Alabama is the better team. The rankings reflect that. The line reflects that. So I'm not saying anything crazy. And Alabama has won 10 of the last 12 regular season matchups with LSU. So they usually kind of handle their business in this game. But LSU, as we said, when LSU played Ole Miss earlier this year, 109-15 at home at night since 2000. So I'll roll with that, and I'm picking LSU.
And they found a way to win that Ole Miss game.
Yeah,
And this is like the heart of my whole thing. Again, it's the smartest thing I've said about college football this year is Bama beats Georgia and doesn't make the playoff. I just thought in the second half of the year, Kalen DeBoer is going to have to make some road trips in the SEC that he has never seen before. And as much as I make fun of the SEC, it's like, it's not fun to go play at Tennessee. It's not fun to go play at LSU. Those places are crazy. They are talented players. And I just don't think his team's going to handle it. I think this is the test of like, and I can see Kalen DeBoer, if he lasts, saying like, man, my first year at Alabama, I did not know what I was getting into. And we went on the road and weren't prepared. So like for you to have that story later, you have to fail now. So I'll pick Bama to fail now. I have 34-24 LSU.
I got 30-28 LSU.
Look at you. You're picking bangers. You're picking a great weekend of college football, man. Landis is right about everything. People are going to be tied to their TVs. Let's play for a dragon statue. We didn't have a chance to trade it off, so it's still in my house, even though I really have not been doing much to earn the right to have it. Who won last week?
I won for the second week in a row. I had Rocco. Neither one of us picked great lineups. I had Rocco Becht and DJ Giddens and they got me a total of 34.2 points. You had Dylan Raiola and Denzel Boston, who got you a total of 23.5, almost all of that from Denzel Boston.
Yeah.
So yeah, it wasn't. I don't think neither one of us were. I think we're like super on it with our picks, but I got some late game chucking it around from Rocco Becht that helped me.
I was between Denzel Boston and Jonah Coleman. Denzel Boston had a decent game. He had 99 receiving yards, but Jonah Coleman scored twice, went over 100. I should have picked Jonah Coleman, the Washington running back, instead of picking the Washington receiver. And you and I both picked Becht. And then when I moved off that, I went to Dylan Raiola because my theory of the case was Nebraska was going to drop a hammer on UCLA, and that was wrong.
Yeah, that was wrong.
So I'm dropping a hammer this week, Landis. By the way, we're now 5-5.
Yeah.
In the Dragon Statue picks. I rushed out to a 3-0 lead, and you have been crawling back, clawing back like a freaking champ. So you have won 2 straight, but you've won 5 of the last 7. So, man, you're a champ. You're an absolute champion. Take this. Dylan Gabriel, Caleb Johnson. Do you like that? Do you like that? I've been saving it, and it was like, should I maybe try to split? I don't care. I'm sick of losing. Dylan Gabriel versus Maryland. Caleb Johnson, the Iowa running back, on Friday night at UCLA. He scored.
I'm a little nervous. I'd be a little nervous about this.
He scored, you and your UCLA rush defense. Caleb Johnson, 19 touchdowns this year, rushing, 1 receiving. That's 20 touchdowns. He's tied the all-time single-season record for touchdowns at Iowa already. He's going to break that record this week against UCLA. And then it's hard to figure out when to pick Dylan Gabriel because Oregon jumps out on people and then chills out a little bit. But it's like, I didn't want to get to the end of the year and be like, oh my gosh, I haven't played Dylan Gabriel yet. So I'm playing 2 monsters, Oregon QB, Iowa running back.
Yeah, no, I would just be worried about Dylan Gabriel and not playing in the second half of this game.
I know, but I'm always worried about that.
No, you gotta know the inner machinations of Dan Lanning and know that when Oregon plays Washington at the end of the year, he's going to want to put 70 on them.
Are you saving him for that for real? Now that I've played this, because you and I think both tried to play Dylan Gabriel before. And we picked him the same week, and we were like, okay, let's just both save him then.
We both tried to pick him against UCLA. Yeah.
Okay. So now you're free. So that'll be great. For week 14, you can have Dylan Gabriel and Dan Lanning's revenge. My God, he's going to throw 9 touchdowns against Washington. Okay. I hope he also throws 9 this week against Maryland.
He might.
Who are you taking?
Another excellent quarterback who I have not taken yet is Shedeur Sanders.
Oh, you haven't taken Shedeur Sanders yet?
I'm taking him against Texas Tech because Texas Tech's pass defense stinks, as we talked about in the preview. And then I wasn't originally going to take Jeremiah Smith, but then I got a little scared of how much Ohio State starters might play, and also maybe that it just becomes a run game for Ohio State. So I switched it to Jeremiah Love, the Notre Dame running back, against Florida State because I have the utmost confidence in Notre Dame running all over Florida State with Jeremiah Love being a big part of it.
Okay. Yeah, I respect sticking with the Jeremiah. So man, you have some guys still to go. I played Sanders in week 3. At least I won. Okay. Those are our Dragon Statue picks. Our picks are in for the games. We got to start figuring it out because again, like finding the right upsets. We know there's some things that are going to happen. So we will have a betting show Friday morning. T. Shu and I, we hit our $500 bet last week. We're now 6-4 on our $500 real money bets. What do we have coming for you this week? And Saturday night, 11 p.m., we will run down all the best of the northern games and check in on some of the southern games. What's your plan? Are you are going to Indiana, Michigan? That's at 3:30. Will you be in a hotel room on Saturday night? Will you be furiously driving back to Columbus? What are you doing?
No, I'll be in a hotel room because I have to drive like an hour back to my hotel. So I want to be able to sit down and watch some games in the nightcap. So yeah,
Okay.
I'll be in a hotel room.
Sounds good. All right. So we'll see you guys on the betting show Friday morning. We'll see you Saturday night for our live post-game show on YouTube at 11 Eastern. Thanks as always to our producer, Mike Yorostowski, who drops the little facts in, has the 3-day-old graphics ready to go, makes us look good and sound good. He is Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises. And that, once again, was Kings of the North.